Good morning, everyone. We are going to get started on our program for the final half day of the 98th League of Oregon Cities Annual Conference. And I'd like to direct your attention to the front of the room and introduce you to your host for this morning's session. She's our lobbyist for housing and land use, Ms. Ariel Nelson.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning for kick off one of our final sessions for this annual conference. I'm really pleased to be here today. As you know, I work in and around homelessness and housing and all of the related issues. And I think one of the most common questions that I get from members, from state legislators is, where are we? What happened with this bill that we passed? Or what happened with this funding? What's going on? What's happening in cities? So I am very grateful to have a panel with a range of perspectives from around the state today. So I'm going to quickly introduce them, and I'm going to share a little bit of background before turning it over to them so you can hear directly from these local leaders the work that's happening on the ground today. So today we have Mayor Rod Crouse from the city of Toledo, who's also here in his capacity as the president-elect of the Oregon Mayors Association. We have Mayor Ted Wheeler, also an LOC Board of Directors member, and bringing perspective from a larger city, our largest city. Mayor Dave Drotzman, Mayor of Hermiston and LOC Vice President. And we are so pleased to have a county partner here with us today, bringing that county partnership and regional perspective. Claire Harrell, Commissioner of Lincoln County, and also a housing leader for many years in her own right as a member of the Oregon Housing Stability Council, which is the oversight advisory board for the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department for the state. All right, so this slide, there are many, many things we could put on here, but I chose to highlight a few key moments in this timeline to kind of show where the state has come. So by all accounts, the state of Oregon has made a historic progress and tremendous commitment to addressing homelessness. Really see that starting in 2017. That legislative session, we saw the state really increase homelessness response funding for the first time in a meaningful way by more than doubling the kind of base level funding amount for homeless prevention and homeless response that traditionally has gone out through the Community Action Agency network. So that jumped from 20 million to 50 million in 2017. And then since that time, we've seen a steady increase in investment from the state. So of course, we entered and experienced the COVID pandemic in 2020, and of course there was a flood of investments for that emergency response. So we saw federal funding, state funding, CARES Act funding, ARPA funding. The state established and funded Project Turnkey, converting hotels into shelters, and also targeted investments in navigation centers in places around the state. So that was kind of in the 2020-21 era. And then in 2022, in the short session, we'll get into this in a bit more detail in the next slide, but the state funded and established the House Bill 4123 homeless coordination pilots. And then we're going to hear a little bit about a body of work that you should be familiar with, the Oregon Mayors Association Task Force and their proposal on preventing and addressing homelessness. So that's 2022 to 23. Mayor Cross is going to get into that in a bit. And then, of course, we started the beginning of this year with decisive action when Governor Tina Kotek took office with an emergency declaration on homelessness and a series of executive orders. And then we've just come through the 2023 legislative session where we saw, again, increased funding, historic funding, response from the state, statewide funding, and then some limited gap funding, and we'll get into those details. So real quickly, if you're not familiar, the House Bill 4123 pilots, this was a bill that was passed in 2022, and it established 8 locally led regional homeless coordination pilots in these key areas around the state. Each pilot received $1 million to operationalize regional partnerships, which were really anchored in city-county partnership. They had some minimum requirements and basic structure, but focused on flexibility for the local communities to work together to leverage and coordinate existing work on the ground and then identify the remaining gaps in partnership with their service providers. And then the executive order, that's number 2302, the governor's executive order declared a state of emergency due to homelessness in 7 specific areas of the state, known as continuums of care. And in those areas established what are known as multi-agency coordination, or MAC groups. A little bit later in the process, the counties of Clatsop, Lynn, and Malheur were able to opt in and come into that emergency declaration as well, based on some qualifying data metrics. And then in the 2023 session, we saw the legislature respond to the governor's emergency order and her executive orders, and they passed a very large funding package very early in that session, which is not typical for a legislative session. The key piece with that funding, and I think you'll hear more about some of this from the remarks, is that it established that funding statewide. So that was really important, of course, to the league, to our county partners, to recognize the need and fund it statewide. And through that funding, the state has stood up what are known as local planning groups throughout the balance of state, the non-urban continuums of care. So that's 26 counties now have local planning groups kind of in and around already the House Bill for 123 pilots on the ground. So before I turn it over to Mayor Cross to talk about the OMA proposal, each of these things that I just discussed, we have a perspective from our panelists. So we've got House Bill for 123 pilot leaders here. We have a city that's part of a MAC group, and we have cities from the balance of state. So you may notice that I bolded in blue. There's 3 or 4 pieces here that are kind of critical to the state or to the local role and city's role, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go through the panelists. But before that, we're going to have Mayor Cross introduce us to the OMA proposal.
Good morning. I'm really happy to see this room is full this morning. It was full last night, and I'm glad to see it full again. So with the Oregon Mayor's proposal, we took almost 7 months to craft something that worked for all 4 corners of the state, and that's whether you're in Eastern Oregon, on the coast, in the metro area, Southern Oregon, because we were very intentional about getting feedback and input from everybody we could in the state. So we had a committee of 25 mayors come together. I was blessed to have these guys on that committee with us. And what we came up with was this little small book I have here in front of me. And that book lined out what we believe that is needed to help get a handle on this homeless crisis. Because it's not just putting people in shelters. It's not just having navigation centers. It's also prevention. In a lot of our small cities like mine, the biggest funds would be going to helping to prevent people from getting into homelessness, whether that's rent assistance, utility assistance, those types of things as our housing costs keep rising. This partnership is with over 100 of our cities. If you have this book or you have access to it, you'll find over 100 what we call one-pagers, the needs of specific cities across the state. And it reaches across all of our demographics, from small towns like mine to the major metro areas like Portland. It's vital that we all understand that this is a collaborative effort. We've requested everything from direct annual funding to doing one-time capital improvement projects. The biggest thing that we are asking for and are continuing to ask for is an annual funding, because as we've all noticed, these issues are not just county issues or just state issues anymore, they are our issues. And cities have had to use ARPA funds to stand things up that very shortly those ARPA dollars go away. And so we need to have that continued ongoing funding. If you look at all the different things that we can do here, everything from abatement to shelter and transitional housing is all part of what is allowed under this funding proposal. We are trying not to tie the hands of any one community from doing what is right in their community, but it gives them a way to do it that is not part of their general fund. As most of us know, our general fund dollars and our ability to use them in things is very, very limited. So the ability to have this extra set of dollars that would be able to give us that flexibility to deal with the local needs at the local level with local solutions is tantamount and very, very vital to helping to get ahead of this. So we have had multiple meetings with the governor, and we are still continuing to have meetings with the governor. For the first time in my memory, and I've been involved in local government now for 25 years, this is the first time I've heard of anything of the OMA being on the news. So we're getting press coverage that we've never had before. Historic levels of funding for homelessness is coming into our state, but we need to spread that around, and that's what we're trying to get done. We found a partnership with the OHCS, and it's vital that that has come. That agency recognizes that we need to work together, because without us, all these proposals, especially in the housing arena, aren't going to happen. We need to build the bridge, and I think you'll see that here, between small, medium, and large, between suburban, rural, and urban centers. We've had more coordination in the last 2 years of our mayors than I've seen in that 25 years, and I am very, very happy with that. I am so pleased that Mayor Wheeler is here with us, because in my time, I hadn't seen much of the Portland mayors, and Mayor Wheeler has made it his goal to make sure to be out with us in front of this, and I am very, very pleased with that. And with that, I will pass it over to Mayor Wheeler.
Well, great. Good morning, and I'll try to be as concise as I possibly can. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership on the OMA Homelessness Task Force. So this is great to see the room full at this hour of the morning. By great, I mean it's distressing that we all feel that we have to be here for this particular weighty topic first thing on a Saturday morning. So this is the major issue confronting the city of Portland. It is the issue that causes my constituents the most anxiety. It's a humanitarian crisis on one side for the people who are living on the streets and dying by the dozens every year on our streets, but it would also be naive and negligent to not point out that the homeless crisis is impacting the entirety of our community. It has public safety implications, it has livability implications, and it has access implications, and it's impacting every single neighborhood in my community. People are making decisions about whether they want their businesses to stay, particularly in our central city core. They're making decisions about whether their employees and their customers are safe. People are making decisions about whether or not they should stay in a neighborhood. If they cannot access their park, if they cannot access public right-of-ways and greenways, that is obviously a significant non-starter for many. So this is an issue that really gets to the core of the viability of our community. Here's the challenge for all of us. As municipal governments, this isn't really our job, historically. Taking care of people with severe mental health issues that have gone untreated, caring for people who have severe addiction issues, contending with the flood of new synthetic opioids, P2P meth, fentanyl now, and whatever is to come next. We don't have the personnel for this, we don't have the expertise, and importantly, we don't have the funding. We don't get Medicaid reimbursements for the work that we do. In the Portland area, our voters supported a regional tax measure that creates hundreds of millions of dollars a year to address homelessness efforts, and not one dime of it comes to the city of Portland because it's designated to go through county government. And we're cities here, we don't need to talk about county government, but if you want to know more, just look at any newspaper or watch any news account. But the bottom line is this. Homelessness is multifaceted. It's not just one thing. For some, it's affordability. For some, it's they've lost a job. But as I say, for others, and increasingly, it is a severe untreated mental health issue or an addiction. And as the problem shifts, we have to reinvent local government to follow the problem and try to address the problem. And that's what we have attempted to do. And the OMA effort was, I agree with you, it was really energizing to be in a room with Oregonians from all political stripes, from all corners of our state, from big cities to small towns, talking about the same issue in the same way. And it really, that's why I went into government. That's why I went into elected office. I wanted to work with people and support our state and support our communities and reach those solutions that we thought were innovative and the best. And the OMA proposal was fabulous because it wasn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. We have different types of problems in the urban area than maybe a rural community, but they're just as pressing. The needs are just as pressing. And so we wanted flexibility at the local level, and we wanted our state government to acknowledge that where things are happening right now, failures upstream are now manifesting themselves more than ever on the streets of our communities. And yet it's as though the legislature doesn't see it and doesn't understand it. We put our ask on the table. It was a modest ask in the scheme of things. What was it, 130 million, I think, at the 127 million, I always round up. I'm an optimist. And the bottom line was it got rejected. It didn't really get the attention it deserved. And I'll be honest, it took the wind out of my sails. I was really disappointed by that because it told me two things. It told me, number one, the legislature doesn't necessarily trust local government to do the right thing. And number two, it told me that they do not understand the magnitude of the issue and maybe don't hear from their constituents the way that local government officials do hear from our constituents constantly and fervently about this issue. So we've reinvented government. In 2 minutes, I'll tell you what we did. We decided that we were going to create a new model at scale that responded to the culture of Portland. Portlanders do want us to fulfill our obligations around public safety and maintaining public right-of-way, parks, green spaces, sidewalks, and the like. They expect us to enforce the law, and they also expect us to treat people with humanity. So people on the streets, they wanted us to create good ways to connect people to whatever services they needed to get off and stay off the streets. So we created what were called TAS sites, temporary alternative shelter sites. There's legal reasons for calling them that. But basically, they would be large-scale encampments where the moment one walks through the door, they are assigned a case manager. They are connected to services. For some, it would be treatment. For some, it would be behavioral health. For some, it would be job training. For some, it would be basic health services. For others, navigation directly to housing, or maybe all of the above. But each person, by name, had a tailored plan when they walked in the door. And then the goal was not to have them stay in an encampment interminably. It was to get them off the streets. These are largely chronically homeless people. We had 6 hours plus worth of testimony when we brought this before our city council. The testimony was overwhelmingly negative, and it was harsh. And I can't even use the words to describe how some people described it. Our local service providers were overwhelmingly opposed. We struggled to get support initially from legislators and the governor. And what they said was, we want a proof of concept. Because what we're hearing from people is, number one, you won't find a site. Number two, you won't find a service provider that wants to work at the scale we were talking. We weren't talking a 50-person shelter. We were talking up to 200 people per site. And number three, they said homeless people won't go. This isn't what homeless people want. And this was all based on outreach that, what we found, by the way, is 9 out of 10 people who are chronically homeless will not go to a congregate shelter. That was an aha moment. 7 out of 10 said they would go to an outside site like this if it was connected to basic hygiene, if we wouldn't sweep them out of it, and if it gave them the opportunity to connect to services. And here we are less than 6 months in with our first site. Our first site is completely full with 182 residents, all of whom are now connected to services, 43 of whom are ready to leave, having been stabilized and ready to go into housing. And so, thank you. And it's not my work. It's Skylar, who's sitting right there, and the other members of my staff who did all of this work against a lot of opposition. And we're continuing to do it. Look, in the last couple of years, we've created hundreds and hundreds of active shelter beds, 300 just in the last couple of months, all of which connect people to services. So these aren't just camps, it's to get people out of them. So that's where we are today. I'm grateful that you're all here. I'm grateful to be part of a community of people who work at the local level. It is the hardest place to be, particularly in these difficult, divisive times where civility is lacking. So I'm just here to share in your vision for what this state can be, and I want to thank you for letting me be here today to speak briefly on this subject.
Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. I want to go back to Mayor Cross's comments earlier about the OMA and the significance of that relationship. There's also a couple people I'd like to recognize this morning. Unfortunately, OMA President Terry Lenahan couldn't be with us today. I appreciate Rod's willingness to step in, and he did a great job filling in for her this morning, primarily because he and our LOC President, Steve Calloway, Terry, and myself have been pretty intimately engaged in this process for the last 18 months, and constantly or consistently are having conversations either with the legislature or with the governor's office. I think we've had 3, if not 4, in-person meetings with the governor on this. I'm not sure I can remember. I've been the mayor for 11 years in Hermiston. I can't remember the last time I had 4 meetings with the governor ever in that 11 years. And so for us I know that this is important to her. I know this is important to our legislature. I share their frustration, though, with the OMA's ask. I thought it was simple. I thought it was fairly conservative. We need a lot more resources than what we asked for, but it was a starting place for us to jump off from. It was also, I would say, there was things already baked before we even brought our conversation to him. And so we kind of got there later than I think she already budgeted to present to the legislature. And so our very first conversation was a no. That was very hard to hear. This will not be part of my budget. And that's unfortunate because I think the legislature and probably the governor specifically don't know all the hard work that you do every day. They don't understand cities. And I don't know about you, but I'm frustrated about that and the importance of the value that you bring to this state and the economic vitality of the state and the livability of the state. So again, I echo these guys' thoughts and comments this morning about your willingness to be here. This is important to you. It's a Saturday morning. You could be doing anything else, but you're here listening and trying to find out solutions for your community because you care. And I just want to say thank you for being here this morning. The other thing I would like to talk about the OMA task force is it was a supported, unanimous, coordinated effort. We never fell apart from each other. We could have threw people under the bus. Everybody stuck together. And there was some tension in there. And there was some pushback and some conversations that were really hard. But in the end, when people tried to divide us, we didn't. We all stuck together because we understand the message in unity. This isn't a Portland issue. This isn't a Metro I-5 issue. This is a whole state issue. And so the unity in that message, I think, was important, and it's resonating. It's starting to gain traction and ground. And part of that we saw during the when the governor came out with her first introduction of her budget, when she said, "We're going to fund 6 of the 7 balance of state requests." That created a lot of frustration from a governor who was going to be governor for all. And then she left out, 80% of the landmass. Left out the coast, the south, the east side of the state. And so a lot of us were frustrated in that conversation, and we were able to push back, and we had some commissioners and legislators specifically that pushed back, and we were finally able to get some funding this last session to help with the balance of state. But it's because of these conversations that were already started and the work that's already being done, and the recognition that this is a significant issue across the state, and that we all need to address it and deal with it. It's a livability issue too. I agree with Mayor Wheeler. It's a humanitarian crisis for those individuals to just let them die on our streets. But it's also a livability issue for the other 99.9% of our residents. And economic development is a huge impact as well. And so 20% of the public safety calls in Hermiston, fire and police, go to transient mental health drug calls. And so it's significantly impacting our budgets, and trying to find the revenues to continue to support that is going to be challenging moving forward without some sort of supports. And I agree with Mayor Wheeler. This was never part of our proclamation of what we were supposed to do as cities. And we're on the front lines trying to deal with it because we care, because we want to see our neighbors and our residents within our community have healthier lives. Got on a soapbox a little bit. I'm supposed to be talking about HB 3115. I'm going to tell you a little bit about...
4123.
Okay, that one. Ariel's the details person. Thank you for keeping me in line. Hermiston's story started in 2010. Originally we had a warming shelter within our community. It was ran by a local, non-regulated board of community volunteers, like a lot of your communities, just people volunteering to step forward. A lot of this is church-based or faith-based, but it's just people that are wanting to see a need in their community and willing to step up. They applied for emergency shelter and got approval, and they were open about 100 nights per year, typically opened November to February, and only on nights when the temperature dipped below 32 degrees. Fast forward timeline to about 2019, right about the same time as Boise Martin came out, we were starting to see an uptick in our region of homelessness people. They were living along our river pathways, they were living in our parks, in our vacant spaces, and we were starting to see more police interactions, more complaints rising. Where I live, Hermiston is about 7 miles from the city of Umatilla to our north, and about 7 miles from Stanfield and Echo to the south, west Umatilla County. And we were just kicking an individual from one community to the next, and often they were the exact same individual. And so we weren't really solving the problem. And so we were consistently having to move the individuals because of complaints, and then Boise Martin came about. About this, we also have a consortium of governments. The city managers and the city mayors of those 4 cities and the county meet monthly to talk about concerns in our region. The conversation was starting to be, how are you guys dealing with homelessness? What are you guys doing to address it? How are you managing it? And we started to form a conversation that was starting to build, and it was more frequent, that we need to do something about this. And a unified vision for a solution in our region would be better than each of the 4 communities trying to do it themselves. It's too expensive, number one. And we were just moving people between communities. So if we could somehow handle the situation with unification between the 4 cities and the county, it would be a better solution for all of those communities. Coincidentally, about the same time, there was a concerned group of community citizens that was noticing the similar issues. They formed a nonprofit called Stepping Stones Alliance. They approached the city leadership with proposals to help. Over the course of the next couple of years, a community-wide conversation was had. We made some changes to our ordinances, legalizing locations for shelters, and went through the NIMBY property conversations. Everybody, wants to participate. They want services, but they don't want it next to them. And so going through those conversations as a community was really challenging. We concluded we needed to find another pathway. In 2021, the Stepping Stones Alliance was awarded a legislative grant as part of a Christmas tree bill. They got $1 million to start working on homelessness solutions for our region. And at the same time, in part with and required by, what was the requirement? Was that HB 3115? The bill that required cities to have a place for people to go, right? Okay, so that's where 3115 came from. That required cities, if you were going to move them, or you were going to suggest that they have to move from a space, you had to actually have a space for them to go to. So we, as cities, decided we were going to formalize an arrangement. We called it the PATH Project. Practical Assistance Through Transitional Housing. That's what PATH stands for. It was a legal arrangement by which all the cities agreed to work towards solutions for facilities and locations and provide services, and more importantly, financially share in the burden of this new agreement. We were awarded one of the 2022 pilot project $1 million grants. So we had two things happening kind of in parallel. The Stepping Stones Alliance project, they had some additional funding. We had the project PATH. We got some funding. The Stepping Stones Alliance all along has been continuing to host a warming shelter. The PATH program wanted to stand up a physical location, though, for transitional housing and the potential for more than just shelter. We put out an RFP, and Stepping Stones Alliance was the eventual winner to provide the social service in coordination with 26 other partners. This winter, we will open a site on donated property by the county. Our county partner had some property that will reside between the two cities of Hermiston and Umatilla. It will have 22 Conestoga-style, Conestoga wagons, Oregon Trail style huts, a low-barrier sleep center, a kitchen, offices, shower trailer, and plenty of property for future conversations around transitional cottage-style housing. Our goal is to transition people from a place of sleeping under the stars and on the ground to a shelter that is drier and warmer, while working through a goal-oriented plan to get them the needed services they require to live a more fulfilling life and potentially reintegrate into our communities. That's our story and where we're at with the PATH program. We're a lot like you. It's taken way longer than when expected to put some of these things in place. Part of it is our own city regulations and the pushback communities are trying to deal with how we're going to manage this, and some of it is state regulation. And so, this is Hermiston's plan, this is West Umatilla County's plan, and I just wanted to share how, HB 4123 is benefiting communities and the dollars and resources that are going out in the pilot programs. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, everyone. I appreciate the invitation, letting this Hatfield slip into a large gathering of McCoys. But I really do appreciate the invite, and especially what it represents. We have had a serious problem with homelessness in Lincoln County for a long time. Pervasive poverty, an economy that's overly dependent on seasonal jobs, high substance abuse and addiction rates, lack of affordable housing stock, all created a perfect storm for us. For many years, we led the state with the highest per capita percentage of homeless students. Think about that. In 2004, when I was first running for office, people were distressed because we had 400 homeless students in our school district. Well, a few years ago, that number peaked at 1,200. The good news of a sort is we're back down to around 800, and the school district tells us the new housing units we've been able to get funded through OHCS with the LIFT program and traditional low-income tax credits. That's making an impact. We have done what we can in the way of homeless services with the resources we've had, but I think probably the case is similar in most, if not all, of your communities, that it is just, the problem is just escalating steadily, escalating, frankly, beyond the capacity of us, most of us, to deal with it. One thing I'm learning, talking to people on the street, have been on the street, those who work with them, is that people are falling off the edge more quickly than ever before. There's no grace note, there's no breathing period, so I think it makes even more important our fight to get adequate services to somebody as soon as they come off the street. So when the House Bill 4123 pilot project opportunity came along, we jumped at it, and now our Community Development Corporation is operating converted motels in both Lincoln City and Newport as transitional housing. And our collaboration under 4123, I think, has been a success because we already have a culture of cooperation among churches, local government, nonprofits. You know, the way I put it to somebody once was, when you're all in the same foxhole and there isn't enough artillery to go around, you learn how to share. We executed a memorandum of agreement with all 7 of our cities, plus the Sletz tribe, which chose a non-voting role. And I'm not saying this just because Rod's at the other end of the table, but the partnership, the enthusiasm, the level of participation from all of our cities has just been outstanding. You know, a dozen years ago, if I'd talk about homelessness to a city elected, for the most part, you know, I'd get shrugs, sad shakes of the head, but you know, that the view was prevalent at the time. It wasn't a city problem, a county problem, or a state problem, but it's reached the point where it's all our problems. And I'll just underline what has been said before. It's both a quality of life issue and a humanitarian issue. We hired a consulting firm out of Beaverton, Morant McLeod, to put together our plan. We now have it in a final draft form and are circulating it to all our partners. So I guess you'd call that our near-term or intermediate track. What we're doing initially this winter, for the first time, the county is opening and operating winter shelters in both Newport and Lincoln City that are not weather dependent. Up until now, we've only had severe weather shelters. And I think, you know, based on the Newport side is open now, Lincoln City will open at the first of the month, and the demand is definitely there. And then we're also pursuing another track that we hope is going to ultimately give us more control over our destiny in services and funding, that we're looking seriously for Lynn, Lincoln, and Benton counties to consider leaving the balance of state continuum of care and forming our own. You know, like all of you excluded in representing communities excluded from the governor's executive order, I share your disappointment. You know, frankly, it's hard not to feel the deck was stacked against us. I'll give a shout out to Representative Gomberg, who kind of led the charge to say that rural Oregon must not be forgotten. You know, one of the reasons we're looking strongly at forming a continuum is having the resources available to us to do an adequate point in time count, which, you know, it's always been something of an afterthought, frankly, something that we've said, well, we really don't have the resources to do this at the level we'd like, but here it is. But now, with the first time the governor using the continuums of care, as a fund distribution mechanism, I think that's really caused a lot of people in our region to look at taking this step. You know, my biggest fear is that folks will think that this is a temporary problem that we can fix, manage, and then move on to the next challenge. It could be very tempting to deal with the most visible aspects of homelessness, the encampments, the rusted out RVs, the blocked sidewalks, and then say, hey, we're done, we've cleaned up the problem. But no, I think you all know that even when we reach that stage, we'll be just getting started. Making affordable homes available to every Oregonian is at the foundation of all of it, but a robust health and social services system and a strong economy will create a better Oregon for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. So some of you may be aware there is an eclipse this morning, so we are going to be taking a short break to go out and view that together before coming back to dig deeper into what you've heard from the mayors and the commissioner. We really want to hear from the audience and dig more into these details. But before we go, I'll just set the stage for kind of what Commissioner Hall set us up for is what is next. And so there's a couple of themes here just to highlight before we break for the eclipse. So strengthen local coordination. We want to continue to do that. We want to continue that partnership that we have found with Oregon Housing and Community Services and the governor. Media coverage. We want to continue to see your hard work, your important work as city leaders in media coverage across the state. Keep your legislators updated. Keep them improving their understanding of what cities do, how cities function, and the work you're doing. And then looking for more focused budget requests. So we continue to, we've got the OMA briefing book showing over 100 city stories of the plans and the intention and the accountability of what you would do with directed local funding. But there are specific gaps out there now, shelter doors that will close this biennium without continued partnership from the state. So I'll leave you with that, and we will see you back here at 9:30 to continue the conversation. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for returning for this important conversation. I think it really speaks to just how prevalent this issue is in all of your communities, and how you really are cities are on the front lines of addressing this crisis. So before we took our break, we were talking about what is next. I mentioned the pieces, the kind of elements that I think are foundational to our work together as cities and with partners at the county, with provider partners. These are the continued themes moving forward, and I think also a foundation of the OMA proposal. So continuing to strengthen local coordination, continuing and strengthening partnership with the governor and Oregon Housing and Community Services, continuing to elevate and educate the public, your constituents through media coverage, sharing stories of all the progress and hard work, as well as the unmet need and the gaps we continue to need to fill. Keep your legislators updated and understanding your role, what you're experiencing, the work you're doing, and then continuing to push on focused budget requests to fill those gaps. So I'm going to kick the panel off with a question, maybe from your local perspective, what do you see as something that's next for you, for your community? You want to start, Mayor Cross?
So for our community, what's next is helping to ensure that the system that we're working on with the county and our 4123 projects keep going. Because as our community, we're only 6 miles away from the county seat. We don't have any services within our city, but we need to make sure that the services are available somewhere, because as we've seen in our community over the last 12 months, the homeless crisis has hit our streets. We have grown from a couple to 2 or 4 cars, so where now we have 2 or 3 encampments. And so we need to be able to start getting people into that system that will allow them to get back on their feet. And so our job is to work with the county and to work with our other partners in the 4123 network to be able to do that.
Mayor Wheeler?
Well, I'm glad to see everybody back. I thought with the eclipse being as awesome as it is, nobody would come back into the room. So, and those of you who did not go out to see the eclipse, you really missed out. You really missed out. So first of all, I just want to second the comment around county government. The bottom line is we have to work with our county governments. In the state of Oregon, county governments are the public health authority, they are the mental health authority, they have navigation, often services in many counties, they have navigation to housing that we just don't have at the local level. And so while I would like to completely rewrite the script on the city-county relationship, we don't have time because of the urgency of the issue that's currently before us. So we have to forge those partnerships. And I'm saying that not only to buck you up, but to buck me up for the ride ahead. Second of all, OHCS has allocated funding now for, well, they haven't allocated it, but they have a source of funding for 600 shelter beds in the state of Oregon. We are needing to know at the local level what our allocation is for our task sites. And so that's going to continue to be front and center. We will continue to meet with the governor, who meets with me on a regular basis to discuss this. We'll continue to advocate for that. The manifestations of homelessness writ large don't always fall on our property. There are other jurisdictions that we have to coordinate with, primarily ODOT. ODOT has many large right-of-ways through the city of Portland, and we made an ask of the legislature last time around for us to be able to manage those right-of-ways, at least the homeless camps that are the most problematic, as well as litter collection, and the legislature denied our request. And so now we're keeping that program on life support until February with the hope that the legislature will come forward with the resources. I've been very public. If the legislature won't fund our ability to provide these services on state land, we will cancel the IGA and we will turn it over completely to the state. And I don't think that's where any of us want to land. So I remain hopeful that we will resolve that issue. And then while I'm grateful to the governor for having allocated $7 million towards our first of what we hope will be 6 task sites, and I'm grateful to our county government for putting in approximately $20 million a week and a half ago, and I'm certainly grateful to my colleagues on the City Council for allocating $29 million to seed these programs. The reality is every single dime is one time only. There are no dollars to continue the efforts. Your point exactly. We don't have ongoing dollars to support what is going to be a long-term need. And that's obviously something that is distressing to us. And again, we need access to Medicaid reimbursements. We need access to SHS, supportive housing measure dollars. And in the absence of that, the whole effort that we've engaged in over the last couple of years falls apart. So that's where it is next from our perspective.
So I think a couple things that we locally are going to look at, and I want to speak specifically from the leadership. We continue to advocate on your behalf. We meet again next week with the governor's office. She continues to listen. During legislative days a couple weeks ago, League of Oregon Cities had, I believe, 4 panels that spoke in front of the legislature. They asked for those. So the message is getting out and getting heard, and legislators want to hear more. We need your continued advocacy and persistence with your local legislators, telling your story, telling the challenges that you are fighting on the front lines about. If you haven't started that conversation yet, you need to, because it needs to be a statewide momentum. It needs to be pushed from every corner of our state. One of the gentlemen came up to me in between, and he had said that we hadn't started this process yet. If you haven't started that process yet, it's okay. It's scary, it's intimidating, and a lot of communities don't want to talk about it, but just burying it under the rug isn't going to make it better. It's affecting every single one of your communities. And if we don't handle those solutions with our neighbors and friends, they're going to go to communities like Portland or Hermiston and become a larger problem to them. And so we would much rather have those people closer to their families and friends and their networks than moving across the state where they don't have the resources and they fall into bad care or drugs and alcohol or whatever pathway they end up going down. And busing them from one community to the next isn't a solution either. I'm sure we've all heard that. I got a bus ticket to your community from blah, blah, blah. That's not a solution, and if you're one of those communities that's doing it, please stop, because it's not helping the problem. I also want you to know, too, you will get some pushback. You're going to have some people come out and say, if you build it, they will come. You're going to have to, stiffen your spine a little bit. And you're going to have to stand up for what's right for your community and the people that are hurting on your streets. And if you're not willing to have those conversations, it's going to come to you whether you want to deal with it or not. It's unfortunate that's the status of where we're at as a society and where we are in Oregon. I, like these two, we're focused on sustainability. I testified 2 weeks ago in front of the legislature about funding shortfalls at the local level. And I said, we're all faced with budget shortfalls right now. Top of the cut priority list is probably going to be our homelessness and housing problem. I know that's not what you wanted to hear this morning, but if we don't have sustainable funding, parks get cut, public safety gets cut, libraries get cut. Those are all livability services to the other 99.9% of your population that's paying you property taxes. And so if we don't have a partner at the statewide level, we aren't going to continue to be able to have solutions on the streets in our communities. And so the OMA task force was a direct allocation to every single community across this state to solve it in a fashion that fits you and your community. That looks different in every single community, whether it's housing prevention or transient housing services, warming shelters, cleanup, public safety funding, mental health, drug addiction, however you need those services. So we wanted the flexible funding. We need sustained, long-term, flexible funding. That's what we're advocating for, and that's what we need to keep these programs going in our communities. Thank you.
Let's see, I believe the question was, what's next for your community? I guess I'd sum it up by saying we're going to keep on going, keep on doing what we've been doing. We're going to get our plan finished, and we are already looking at an organizational structure for a continuing board of some kind to continue this partnership as we move to the implementation phase. We're going to go great guns on forming our own continuum of care. And then we'll join you and many others in advocating for the ongoing, sustainable, flexible money we need to really address this problem.
All right, so now we have some time dedicated to have a discussion with the room. We've got a couple of mic runners, Nolan on the side here and Scott. Please feel free to raise your hand and they can come over to you. I think we have an opportunity to get into some specifics. Who else has questions about working with ODOT? I think there might be a few of you. City-county relationships, community conversations, these are easy topics, right?
Hi there. My name's Tom Brown, some city councils of Astoria. And I just wanted to make a comment on one of the comments that was just made about build it and they will come. And it just struck me that, if we're all building, they will stay. Because they don't need to go someplace else. We can build it and we can have services and we can have create that continuum of care Because that's the hard thing, is to catch and hold. If you catch and let them go and they go someplace else, it's useless. So, you know, I think hearing that everybody's building and letting our communities know that may be a really important thing to do.
Thank you. I'll comment on that. Tom, thank you for that comment. I would maybe go a little bit further and try and find collaborations with other cities and the county. It's expensive work, super expensive. So for the 4 cities that we're working with, it was a more affordable option for us to have one local site versus each of the 4 communities. So I don't know that we need 241 sites across every city in the state, but if there are collaborations that you can form, I think that's going to be a better financial solution. But thank you for your comments, because yeah, we all need to be looking at this as a solution.
Yeah, Rob Corbett, City of Pendleton. I'd like to hear you comment on what I'm about to say. There's an article in the East Oregonian today, Oregon Capital Chronicle reports, survey in Oregon, 40% of Oregon adults believe homelessness is the most important issue in the state, according to a recent survey. The second most important issue in that survey, 16% believe that addiction is the most important issue in the state today. 15% say the housing supply is the #1 issue in the state today. So when you add it all up, 85% believe homelessness, housing supply, and addiction are the #1 issue in the state. I'd argue that somewhere in there, mental health or the lack of mental health treatment is also one of the more important issues that we face in the state of Oregon today. And I would argue that they're all, in my opinion, is they're all combined to really contribute massively to the problem that we're dealing with. My opinion is that when the League of Oregon Cities prioritized going to the state during the last legislative session and asked for money for housing, that what we were doing was we were asking the state to help us treat the symptoms that we're all suffering from. And what I would ask you to do is to comment on the idea that the League of Oregon Cities ought to be coming forward with a priority policy that the state of Oregon start focusing on the issue of addiction and mental illness and correct that.
This might be a good time for me to make a plug. If you haven't heard, the League is currently in our recruitment process, application process for our policy committee process, which is what sets the LOC's legislative agenda and priorities. So if you go to the LOC website after the conference, the first thing you will see is the link to learn about the policy committee process. We have 7 committees. I promise you, your priorities can be found in each of those committees. You have until the end of this month to submit an application, and it's critically important that we get representation from all regions of the state, from large, small, urban, rural, suburban communities. We really want to make sure your perspectives, all levels of expertise, are reflected in the next agenda going forward. So that process will start in the spring and inform our agenda going into the next big session in 2025.
So I just want to comment from the aspect of the Oregon Mayors Association, our homeless proposal. If you look at what those dollars could be used for, it is for things like that. As your city sees fit as what is most important in your city in being able to deal with this entire issue. You're absolutely correct. It's all part of one issue. And we need to be able to get more dollars focused into that. And yet cities, as we all know, are not tasked with those issues. But we have other agencies within our area, whether that's with the county or with the state, that are tasked to do that. And we can help support those with those dollars. That's why we made the proposal the way we did, was because each community is different, and what each community sees as their primary need is what those dollars can go for. And so, depending upon where you live, that could be anything from just abatement, in other words, cleaning things up, removing an RV that's dead, all the way to supporting the local behavioral health center and making sure they have enough dollars to take in and continue their work. So it's a broad range of items that cities would be allowed to use these dollars for. And that's why it's important, because each community is different.
I want to, excuse me, I want to agree with that 100%, first of all. Second of all, the way that these issues are described speaks to the lack of understanding of a large swath of our population about what we're actually dealing with. Homelessness is a symptom of many systemic failures around the lack of affordable housing in our state, around the intentionality behind our failed behavioral health system in our state, frankly, our non-existent mental health system in our state, the lack of resources available for treatment with an overlay of decriminalizing drug use, combined with livability issues that are immediately and directly related to the problem of homelessness in our community. And even economic recovery, at least in the Portland area, is very much wrapped around the axle of the homelessness crisis writ large. And so part of what we have to do at the local level is remind everybody that the manifestations of homelessness are because we don't have systems of care upstream for behavioral health or substance use disorder treatment. At the local level, although we have passed housing bonds and we are involved in affordable housing, it's really not center of target for us. And I have to constantly remind my colleagues in other levels of elected government, our job is public safety, our job is maintaining infrastructure and maintaining public right-of-ways and parks and a few other things. That's our job. And when I look at how much money we are now putting into responses to the various manifestations of homelessness, including human services and behavioral health and public health, every one of those dollars is coming out of our general fund. Our general fund is the source of funding for police, fire, 911 response, and overall emergency management. We are robbing Peter to pay Paul because the rest of the political economic infrastructure at the county and at the state and even at the federal level does not acknowledge or understand the problem or the urgency, the sense of urgency, the way we do at the local level. So I hope part of what we do in this next legislative session is start from the very beginning, educating our legislative leadership and our legislators on what the real problems are and what the causes are of those problems. It's not because we're hippy-dippy stupid people at the local level. It's because everything else, every other safety net has fallen through when it got stress tested, and it lands on the streets of our communities. And then everybody looks at it and goes, well, look at that mess at the local level. That's their problem to fix. We cannot fix it without the county and the state government support. And even the way Medicaid reimbursements work at the federal level, it's Byzantine, it is antiquated, it is ineffective given the current challenges faced by cities large and small all across the United States today. And nobody else is gonna shake the tree if we don't. That's the bottom line. Nobody wants... If I'm a political advisor and I'm advising somebody at the state or the federal level, I'm telling them stay as far away from homelessness as you can. You do not want this dog to land on your lap. You don't want to be Ted Wheeler. But so it's our job to make sure that we right-size the streams of funding, the responsibility, the continuums of care towards those levels of government that actually have funding, actually have expertise, and actually have agency and authority to do something about it. We're patching it together. This is a short-term solution, all the things that we are doing. The longer-term solution has to be a collective we. And it's not right now, it's us, but we have to change it into a we.
I don't have anything more eloquent to say than that. I think he spoke extremely well to how we're all feeling. The one thing I will say, I'm going to put a shameless plug in here as well. I hope you stick around for the business meeting after this. I think you're going to hear some exciting news about what LOC will be doing next year, and I think that has a lot to do with how we can better budget for some of the services that we're providing. One thing I will comment on that Rob Corbett, neighbor of ours in Eastern Oregon, mentioned, you said addiction. We were never intended to provide addiction services. Homelessness, we were never intended to provide addiction or homelessness services. Housing supply, every day they're pointing at you and saying your SDCs are too high. We all know that's not true. We barely cover the costs of which we're collecting to put those services in. So yes, we do have some things that we can manifest and do on a localized basis to help with the cost of property. But you know, these things, like Mayor Wheeler said, public safety, libraries, parks and rec, those weren't listed in the things that Mr. Corbett said. And so those are the things that mental health, there's another one. We weren't mental health providers, but it's all hitting us in the face on our streets every day. So stick around for that conversation during our business meeting. I think you'll be excited to hear what the LOC is proposing to do for next year. Thank you.
All right, I think we have some more hands raised in the crowd.
So,
Go ahead.
hi, Ellen Porter, City Councilor from the City of Roseburg. One of our big barriers, and I know some of you have heard me beat this drum for the last year, but one of our big barriers is dealing with potential liability issues, and I've heard that from a lot of the other smaller communities throughout the state. Two questions. One for Mayor Drotzman. It's encouraging to hear that you got some collaboration with your county in this area anyway. Question on that one is whether or not that site is managed by a nonprofit. And then for the rest of you, how do you all deal with the potential liabilities associated with like putting up campgrounds and stuff?
I'll talk to the county one specifically, and maybe some of our lobbyist specialists, our policy experts can talk through what we're doing about liability and how you as communities are also dealing with. But the project, our PATH project, the unification between the four cities, or the four cities and the county, we've all signed a memorandum of understanding to support that. But we did an RFP to go out and find a service provider. So it's not the city that's providing those services, it's Stepping Stones Alliance, and they're collaborating with 26 other entities to bring those services into the site. So we aren't, as cities, specifically hands-on managing that every day. We've contracted with a local nonprofit to do that for us. Some of you have, like in our region, it's CAPCO. What are they called?
The Community Action Agency?
Community action agencies that may be helpful and beneficial to the conversation and maybe providing some of these services. Stepping Stones Alliance is also partnering with our Community Action Agency to bring in the services that are going to be accessible to those individuals.
Great question, and I wish I had a better answer for you than the answer I'm going to give. We're self-insured. We get sued all the time. We will get sued no matter what we do. We have a number of organizations in the metro area that believe, and I'm just going to say this as neutrally as I can because everybody's entitled to their opinion, no matter how foolish it may be, that we should not be doing anything to disrupt the population of people living on our streets, even if it kills them. Now, I have searched my soul, and I don't believe in that moral argument. It's not one that sits well with me. But there will be people who will sue us every step of the way. Anytime, if we want to move somebody out of a dangerous traffic circle, they'll say we're impinging. If we want to move somebody away from a school or out of a park, they'll say we're impinging. And that's, viva la democracy. They're entitled to do that. That's just the way it is. I would argue that the way that's maybe a little craftier around reducing liability is make sure you have as many controls in place as possible. For example, we not only invest in public safety, but we invest in outreach, workers who go out into the community, who work with the homeless population, who try to navigate them towards one of our shelters or navigate them towards services. Even when we clean up our camps, we have a legally defensible strategy. We post them, we send social workers. There is a timeline that is associated with that. We hand people maps of where they can actually go. And again, that's all been double checked by our attorneys. And then we move people, but when we move them, we save their belongings at a designated site. And everything we do, we try to make sure it comports with Martin v. Boise, that we have our I's dotted, our T's crossed. But I'll just tell you, in America in 2023, that will not stop you from being sued, but it might help you after 6 or 8 months of negotiation to prove that you were thoughtful in the way that you managed the process.
Good morning. My name is Nico Casares. I'm city councilor from Almsville, Oregon. We're little baby fish in the pond, but I had a question for you. In my day job, I work directly with veterans, and it's incredibly rewarding work, but it's also very challenging, of course. Given the fact that our community organizations or like private companies, like the Providences, the Legacies, the OHSUs of the world are overwhelmed, county mental health department and social workers are overwhelmed. In light of all that, is there any success story that you guys have from your communities or your jurisdictions regarding mental health? Like anything positive, because it's hard to find, I guess, the good when just you have social workers overwhelmed, you have everyday, people that, work with people with mental issues are so overwhelmed to the point where literally people have to commit crimes to get the help they need. So is there any success stories regarding mental health from your communities you can share with us?
In my small community of Toledo, we broke ground earlier this year on 11 units of veterans housing, and it's all fully assisted housing. In other words, all the necessary helps and supports that those veterans need, whether they're disabled or just retired, are all taken care of for them. And so that was one thing that we started on, and it was a long process. This took 4 years before we could finally get to groundbreaking and get the money in to do it. But it's needed. In our county, we have learned that our average age of our homeless, and this is counting the almost 800 homeless kids in our schools, the average age is 47 years old. So if you do the math and you take those 750 plus kids out of that equation, that tells you where this number is. And so that's what we're headed toward, and I'm really proud to say that the Blackberry Hill complex is going to be up and running hopefully this spring.
And I really appreciate that.
Can I make one comment?
Go ahead.
Sorry. I hear what you're saying. Access to mental health services is very, very difficult. And finding healthcare providers that want to provide it, especially to our most needy and challenged population, they're very, very difficult. And when you talk about rural access, even more difficult. So the Oregonian, I'll put a plug in for the Oregonian, they did a great article this week talking about the mental health and status of mental health in the state of Oregon. It was just this week. Very long article talking about it. And it ranks us like 4th in the nation for access for mental health. I mean, that's not what I'm seeing on the streets. But a lot of it has to do, especially in rural communities, just not having enough providers. And again, I think it comes back to the compensation potentially for providers and not accepting Medicaid or Medicare services. And so they're providing services, but maybe to more affluent group. They're super necessary as well. I mean, we're all challenged with mental health to some degree, and everybody or everyone should have access to that. But the people that need it the most that we're talking about today on our streets, they're not getting the access that they need. And I agree with you. We need to do a better job of getting more engagement in the mental health conversation for those people on our streets. Thanks for bringing that up, though.
I think it's a hugely important issue. And I have a bunch of thoughts, none of which are perhaps welcome. Number one, it's not just the people on the streets who are now struggling with mental health issues. Our first responders have very serious behavioral health concerns. The trauma of day after day after day after day responding to the kinds of calls that they are now responding to from morning till night is having a real impact on our first responders, police, fire, EMTs, others, and our hospital workers. This cannot be discounted as part of the reason why we are struggling to recruit people into all of these positions. That's thing number one. And we are providing those services at the local level for our first responders. Now it's more of a question. We're in a presidential campaign cycle. There's a lot of people running for Congress. We have a lot of new congressmen and congresswomen here on the West Coast. Why on earth is local government being tasked to support the men and women who serve this country in the armed forces? Where the hell is the federal government? Why aren't they doing this? And I don't understand how this conversation continues to get shoved down to the local level. We have a lot of compassion for the people who are on our streets who serve this country. I wish that compassion was shared by our federal office holders, and it's not, because this issue just keeps coming up year after year after year after year. So in this campaign cycle, I hope we hold people's feet to the fire and say, why isn't this part of our overall collective response to the armed forces? We should assume that people who go through these types of careers have reciprocal behavioral health issues that need to be resolved as part of their service to this country. It should be assumed, not something we have to fight for at the local level. That's my personal viewpoint.
I'll say here to everything that's been mentioned. The battle for resources is constant. We are finding it more and more difficult in our county behavioral health program to recruit and retain people despite bumping up salaries and benefit packages considerably. And I'm ashamed to say it, but until now, our county has only had 9 units of permanent supportive housing for people with severe and persistent mental illness. I think everybody knows a lot of people with mental illness can create or resume productive lives, but some folks, the situation is complicated enough that they need a permanent supportive setting. Well, we've got our Health and Human Services Director is pretty activist on a lot of things, and she has acquired a site for us in Lincoln City where we will be building 19 more supportive housing units next year. But it's a struggle to meet the needs of this population, and I think it's a struggle everywhere.
Hi, I'm Jordan Ort from Staten, but I wanted to take a minute to advocate for some even smaller communities up the Santiam Canyon, particularly Mill City. I spoke with a volunteer firefighter who told me that, and this is, if you don't know, one of the communities that was ravaged by the fires in 2021, and, excuse me, 2020? I'm a little nervous. He was telling me a story of that they set up services for people experiencing homelessness, and their calls for service in this volunteer community, so they have 2 paid positions. One is the fire chief, one is the assistant, and then everyone else is a volunteer. Their calls for service have tripled, and they were helping one gentleman. He had out-of-state plates, and they were asking him, where did you come from? And he came from Salem. He actually came from out of town. I can't remember what state he came from. But he went to Salem, and a social worker there told him, we don't have resources for you, but if you drive out to Mill City, they have resources, they can help you. So it's a really frustrating situation. This town has 800 people. They're barely able to sustain themselves, and now we have an influx of people. We know people coming from out of state. They're overwhelming our resources. We are now experiencing an influx of people who are now eligible for OHP, Medicaid, and SNAP services that are undocumented in our communities. It's exacerbating our system on the backs of our everyday workers. So to say, if they build it, they will come, they will absolutely come. When we did our point in time count, excuse me, I'm really nervous. When we did our point in time count in Staten, we have a population of 8,400 people. We had 12 people experiencing homelessness. Our concern, and it's a very valid concern, is that people will come to our community to use our services because Salem is overwhelmed. We are already expanding our emergency room because people know that Salem, the time that you have to wait is exorbitant. So they come to Staten, again, where we don't have as many resources. We are not getting as much funding. We are not favored by our legislature in our community. I feel like this entire time that our rural communities, we say we care about our rural communities, but the fruit isn't there. And I'd really love to I'd really love to see someone on your panel that represented our small communities and what we can do about that.
Ma'am, that would be me. I'm in a town of 3,600 people, inland on the Oregon coast, and in a county of 52,000 people. And being rural, boy, do I get it. And one of the things that I started out talking with Mayor Wheeler about when we started the whole OMA proposal was quite simply, if a person goes homeless in my town where there are no services, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to go over to Newport where there are services. And then they're going to find out that there's no room at that end. And so then what are they going to do? They're going to go from that end to Eugene, Salem, Portland, where they make the nightly news. And from my perspective, I want to keep our folks housed, maintained in my small rural town. I want to make sure that we don't have any more people go homeless, whether that's from mental health issues, whether that's from addiction issues, or just plain economic issues. And so that's why I've dove into this to work with people like Commissioner Hall, because if we don't start at the local, rural level, it just continues to head up the line. And I can, trust me, I can understand how you're feeling. I've talked to many mayors that have been in the line of, they just got dropped off at my city. And we can't have that anymore. We have to do this together. We have to do largest city to smallest city, have to work together to fix this, because we can't all be islands unto ourselves anymore.
Thank you, Mayor Cross. And with that, we are out of time. I want to thank this panel and thank you for joining us for this really important conversation. It's not over. We know we have so much more work to do. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you all, whether it's through an LOC policy committee or at next year's conference, but hopefully before that. So please stick around for our keynote speakers. And thank you again. Please join me in thanking this panel.